So welcome everyone. I'm Gingerich. I am the Director of Compliance at Software Freedom Conservancy, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about a router and also about the big picture around that router. So first of all, I want to ask, why are we here? I'm not going to answer the existential, but I am going to hopefully answer a question that may be related to that for a lot of you. And so that is, why are we here today at SCaLE? Why did we come to talk about all of this neat stuff, all of these interesting software tools that we're using, and everything else like that? Well, I would say that a big reason is cool technology. So this is an example of some really cool technology that was first made a few hundred years ago. And the neat thing about this technology is it gave people a lot of knowledge that they didn't have before. And one of the big things that this technology did, the printing press, is that it changed a lot of power. A lot of people who didn't previously have power had a lot of power because they could read things that they couldn't read before. And so when there are shifts in technology, there are shifts in power. Now, one of the things that is tricky about power is it is hard to quantify. And so as a result, it is difficult to optimize. But we can do some things to determine who has power in a situation. And when we talk about power at an individual level, we are talking about agency. So the ability of people to control their lives, which is often done through their ability to control the technology that they are using. So some of the questions we can ask to determine who has power are of this format here. Can you do this or that? And when it comes to our technology, that is often, can you repair it? Can you repair the hardware and the software? Can you modify that hardware and software? And importantly also, can you install software onto that hardware? And this is really where the rubber meets the road when it comes to agency in our software. So I'm going to be talking a lot about install today because it is a super important part of agency in our technology. So one great example of install is this computer right here. This is Pentium 133, and you can see that an operating system is being installed onto this computer. So this computer is giving you all of this ability to install, and that's great. People are getting a lot of agency with this device. And I picked this one specifically because this is the sort of computer that would have been used at the time that many of the SCaLE core team were starting to organize their first conferences. So according to the history page, this happened in the late 90s in Simi Valley. And the team organized a few conferences, Lugfest they were called, every 6 months. And they would have been using computers like this that gave you install. Now, fast forward a few years, and we have some different types of computers coming out. So here's an example of one type of computer that came out a few years later. This was quite a different computer. I mean, it has a bit of a different shape, but I think the more important thing is that it had a lot of differences in install. Now, this is the iPhone 3G, so it actually had an app store. The previous iPhone, the 2G iPhone, did not come with an app store. And this one, actually, you'll see someone added Cydia, which is an additional app store, so they had to jailbreak their iPhone. But one of the issues with that is there is a big risk of bricking your iPhone. And so it is unethical when a device will brick itself or when it is too easy to brick. And so that's one of the issues with this phone. It also doesn't let you install what you want, only what Apple says you can install. So here's another device from a similar era. This gives you a little bit more ability to install. This is running Android, and you can install stuff through sideloading. You can also replace the operating system on this specific device although a similar device, the non-Verizon version of the Motorola Droid called the Motorola Milestone, had a locked bootloader, and so you could not install the operating system you want. And so updates could be forced on you, and you had really no choice but to accept them because you couldn't install something else instead. So that would be another example of unethical technology. Now, there were some different sorts of examples at that time. One of those examples is the Nokia N900, and this ran a version of Debian called Mamo. And so this device gave you a lot more power, a lot more agency in your computing. It did still have some non-free software on it for the user interface and things like that, but it did give you a lot more agency. You could do things like install GCC on it, which I wrote about in a blog post from many years ago if you want to look that up. So another example of a computer, a more recent example, is this one right here. Now, this computer appears to be receiving an update. This was made by a certain TV manufacturer that I will be talking about more in a little bit. And this update appears to be not one that the user has compiled together to put the things that they want on the TV, but rather it is something that Vizio told them they have to put on their TV. And one of the issues here is that TVs like this spy on you. They look at all of your viewing data. That's all provided to the TV manufacturer, and they sell that data onward from there. So that is another example of unethical technology. So what do we need? We need ethical technology. And how do we get that? Well, because today's technology is defined so much by software, the functionality is largely defined by what software is on the device, we need software freedom. And to do that, we at Software Freedom Conservancy are involved in several initiatives to make sure that you have that software freedom. And so I'm going to talk about 3 of those initiatives today. And I'm going to start with one of our most recent initiatives, one that we're just starting up, and that is that we build hardware. And in particular, we have started this initiative by building the OpenWrt One. So what is this? It is a wireless router. You may have seen a bunch of them around. There's one over here, I think, on the stage, and there are many throughout the conference. They're all over the place. This is a really neat project that gives you a lot of freedom and agency. So this is a picture of the front and the back. You can see it has a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port with power over Ethernet. It also has USB-C power, so you don't have to worry about finding some random adapter, and a lot of other neat features. Also inside the router, and I'll just hold it up here so you can see it, the size while I'm doing that, you can see that it has a bunch of neat features like an M2 slot for storage, and it also has a microbus port for adding different peripherals and things, and a tag header on there as well. So there are a lot of neat features in this device. But why is it that we made this device? Well, there are several reasons that we felt it was necessary to build the OpenWrt One. One such reason is this. TP-Link is a wireless router manufacturer, and they posted this statement on their website after they read a ruling from the FCC because they felt that this would be a great way for them to claim that you were not allowed to install what you wanted onto the routers that they sold. And so at the bottom here, you can see that it says, as a result of these necessary changes, which they want you to believe were because the FCC told them, users are not able to flash the current generation of open source third-party firmware. And so we wanted to see if this was indeed true. You'll notice this is from the Wayback Machine, but this sort of thing is still told to us in private in our recent conversations with router manufacturers, and so we felt it was necessary to test this. The other thing we found is that when we asked for source code from these manufacturers of wireless routers, we would often run into something like this. The scripts used to control compilation, that is, the instructions for how to compile, would tell us to run make. We would do so, and then we would get an error like this. And so it was clear that the source code was incomplete because they did not provide enough information for us to build it. And here's another example, just so you know it's not isolated to one device. I could have had hundreds of examples, but I chose to not bore you with those today. So this was a big issue. We wanted to see if it was really that hard to get software to compile and install onto the device as a user of the device. Also, we noticed that there were some issues when it came to support. So this is a router here that came out, you can see, in September of 2019. It cost approximately $400. And it was, I guess, a pretty fancy router. But then a few years later, someone on a forum noticed that it had been end-of-life. So this is a post from July 21st, 2023. Less than 4 years later, apparently your $400 router is not useful anymore. And so we thought that this was a problem, and we wanted to fix that as well. Now, also, if you are trying to diagnose or recover your router, sometimes you will need a serial port. And we found that on a lot of routers, this was very hard to get. On this router, for example, not only do you have to solder in some wires to the serial pins, but you also need to bridge some places with solder where resistors should have been. So we think maybe the router manufacturer didn't want you to have a serial port, so they made it extra hard, and we wanted to show that that was not necessary, and we could make it much easier for you. We also found that lawsuits took quite a while to progress to a place where we get the complete source code. And so we wanted to see if we could perhaps make a router a little bit faster than it took for a lawsuit to happen. Now, another thing that we did is we collaborated together on this. So who made this? Well, I was the person at Software Freedom Conservancy who worked on it, who managed the project, and then we also had many people from the OpenWrt project who worked on it, and chiefly John Crispin, who is on the project leadership committee. He organized a lot of the hardware design and all of those sorts of things. So we're very happy for that. We also worked with a manufacturing partner called Banana Pi. So how exactly is it that we made this? Well, we started by having a vote. Because it's a community project, we wanted to see if people wanted to have the OpenWrt name on this device. So we started this vote. You can see here in early January last year, and we asked people, do you want to do this? The answer was a resounding yes. So then we got together and started prototyping. So here's an example of us prototyping some of the early hardware. At the top left, you can see a breakout board for an SPI NAND chip. And so we're testing that along with this development board here at the bottom right, which has the same SoC, the same chip that went into the OpenWrt One. So this is what we started with. We did some prototyping, and then once we had a prototype design, then we did burn-in testing to make sure that it worked well over time. So making sure all of the network interfaces were saturated for several days at a time, and it didn't heat up, and that all worked well. We did have to fix a couple things along the way. For example, the real-time clock only lasted for a couple days when you unplugged the power and had a battery in it, so we had to do some hardware fixes for that. But yeah, we made all those fixes, and then we released it. So this was released in November last year on Black Friday, and it sold out within a week. So we were very excited that our first manufacturing run had sold out so quickly, and it showed us that people want agency in their hardware. And we thought that was great. We thought this might be the case, but now we knew by how many people purchased this device that people really, really wanted it. And so then from there, we decided to see, well, what exactly is it that we fixed with this? And we took a look and we saw, well, we fixed almost everything. So I'll get into that caveat in a little bit, but those 5 things I mentioned earlier, I'll go through here. So this is the certification we received from an FCC testing lab, which says, yes, this device is FCC certified. You can see at the bottom there, it says OpenWrt One. So we gave them an OpenWrt One running OpenWrt, and they said, yes, this is FCC certified. So we had been telling router manufacturers for a while that this was not a problem, and now we had the proof. So all we had to do was build a router to tell them that this was not a problem. So now we can go and tell them, hey, everyone, don't worry, that's not a problem. People can install onto your devices, and there's no issue with the FCC for that. Another thing that we fixed that we confirmed that you can indeed compile and install software and put it on a device as a user. There's actually no problem doing that. So this is the set of instructions that come with the OpenWrt One. At the top shows you how to set up your build system, which is described in a text file as well, in case you don't have network access while you're doing the build. And then you run a couple commands here, and then the result is in this location here, it shows you. And then once you have that firmware image, then you can install it onto the device using these commands, copy it using SCP, and then run this sysupgrade command on the resulting firmware image. So looks like you can compile and install given these instructions, and of course we tested it just to make sure that that was the case. So you can see at the top here, these are the last few lines of the make command. You can see the return code is 0, looks successful there, and then we are listing the directory that it told us to list to see where the firmware image would end up. And then you can see at the bottom of there, on the 6th last line, there is a file ending in sysupgrade.itb, and that is the file that the instructions told us would be there. And so this is exactly what we're looking for when we are testing the source code for a wireless or any other device like that. And so we are super happy that this was easy to do. And now we can also tell router manufacturers, hey, we noticed you had a hard time doing this. Just look at this as an example. Look at how easy it was for us to do. Now, we also wanted to determine a support timeline. And we have not set a particular number of years, but we have found in our experience that community support tends to last quite a long time. So for example, with Debian, they today on the latest version of Debian still support the Pentium 4, which came out 25 years ago. So that's just a few years after that Pentium 133. So we have a lot of support from Debian. Now OpenWrt currently today supports routers that were first manufactured 14 years ago. So that's a lot of support for existing routers. And we would expect the OpenWrt One to have at least 10 years of support, if not 20 or 30 years. We think we should be measuring support life cycles in decades, not just a few years. We also managed to fix that serial port. So on the front of the OpenWrt One, right here, there is a USB serial port. So no soldering required. You can simply plug in a USB cable and get serial for yourself right there. So now let's compare this to a lawsuit here. So we built this hardware from conception, from the first time someone said, I think we should build this, to the time where it was out the door being shipped to customers was 11 months, so a little under a year. Now, it took a bit longer to go through a recent lawsuit that we're actually still in the middle of. That one will take 47 months, probably a little bit more than that, actually. So this is great. We were able to get a result for excellent software freedom in this hardware that we built in a relatively short amount of time. But of course, both ways of doing things are important. We don't want people to have to buy new hardware to get the freedom and agency in their devices and the software on them, so that's why we need lawsuits as well. Now, I was mentioning that caveat there, and that is that there is still a blob or two in this device. So there are, in particular, 3 blobs, and when I say a blob, I mean a little piece of proprietary software that runs in the wireless chip or on the Ethernet controller, and so we still needed to have some of these in the device. So there's a little bit in the wireless chip, a little bit in the 2.5 gigabit Ethernet controller, and then a tiny bit for the RAM calibration at startup before the bootloader begins. And why is it that we needed these blobs? Well, it is because of power, and particularly, it is because of power that we don't have yet. So one of the ways to resolve this problem is to find hardware that doesn't require any blobs. And so such hardware does exist, at least for now, but it is 20 years old, and you can buy that if you want to, if the features work for you. And if you do want to do that, please buy a router from ThinkPenguin. They make routers that use hardware that does not require blobs, and they're also very much compliant with the copyleft licenses. So we decided that we needed to take this approach to make sure that we could get new hardware to the same place. We're not quite there yet, but we can fix this. And how is it that we will fix it? Well, there are 2 main ways. One of them is that we can reverse engineer these blobs, and we can make free software that replicates what these little tiny proprietary bits do. And so one of the key features of the OpenWrt One is that you can change everything on it. So we decided not to put these non-free blobs into a ROM so you couldn't fix them later on and make them more free. Instead, we made sure that they were modifiable so that you could fix them and give yourself more freedom in that software later on. And so that is one way to do it, through reverse engineering. The second way is by gaining market power. So the more people buy the OpenWrt One or devices like it, the more that when we go to a manufacturer and say, you have to fix this, that they have to fix it. Because market power is a very important way of ensuring that we are getting our rights. And so that is why we need to band together and support these things so that we can tell manufacturers, you have to fix this. Now, an exciting part about this router that has been mentioned a few times is that we are your Wi-Fi. That is, OpenWrt One is being used to provide essentially all of the Wi-Fi at the conference this year. So we at Software Freedom Conservancy are very proud to be the network sponsor for SCaLE this year. And we are also super happy and grateful for all of the volunteers at SCaLE that make all of this happen, make the network work, and get it all set up. So thank you very much to SCaLE for all of that. And I wanted to add another note about this, which is that it was required for a conference like SCaLE to be using recent hardware, because if SCaLE had chosen to use hardware from 20 years ago, they would not have been able to support all of the users that needed to use the network. Basically, we would have had to tell, half of people, 3/4 of people, please don't use the network because there are too many people on here. And so that is a key thing about the OpenWrt One and other modern hardware, is that we need this modern hardware to make sure that people can get their rights and their freedoms in something that they are actually able to use. And so that's why we think it's super crucial to be pushing forward on new hardware so that we can continue to have those rights going forward. Now, you may be wondering, is this enough? Can we, now that we have this one router, is this sufficient to get us all the freedoms we need? Well, of course, we need more devices that respect our freedoms. And there are a few ways we can do that. One of them is that we can make more devices, and actually a vote in the OpenWrt community is just about coming to a close on the OpenWrt 2. So this will be a different kind of router. We'll still keep making the 1, but the 2 will have 2 10 gigabit ports, several 2.5 gigabit ports, and Wi-Fi 7. So this is likely to come out late this year, and if you want something a little bit beefier, then you can use that device. It will be a bit more expensive, of course, as a result. The other thing we're doing is that we are exploring other device classes, other types of devices where it may help for us to make hardware that respects your freedom, and so that's another thing we're doing. The other 2 things are the 2 other activities of Software Freedom Conservancy that I want to tell you about today that allow you to take this freedom you are getting with your hardware and do something with it. So one of those that I've been thinking about different names for it, and this is one that kind of comes to mind for me, is Humanity First software. So this is software that gives the people who use it, that is the humans, agency. So it puts the humans first. Now, at Software Freedom Conservancy, we have a few dozen member projects, and so these are projects, software projects that call us home, and we do a lot of work for them to make sure they are successful in what they do, like organizing conferences, paying developers, etc. And so this is a super important part of what we do to make sure you have, once you have that software that gives you install, the ability to put freedom-respecting software onto those devices. So the one I wanted to start out first, because it relates to some of the software right to repair stuff I've been discussing, is reproducible builds. So this is a project that shows you that given a binary, is this source code corresponding to it? That is, when you compile the source code, do you get a bit-for-bit identical binary? And so we think that's pretty cool. It's a great way of us being able to see whether something is in compliance to a large extent, and we're very happy to have them on board. Another project that you are probably familiar with is OpenWrt, so that's why we worked with them on the OpenWrt One, because they are calling us home. They are one of our member projects. So the neat thing about OpenWrt is that it was started through a lawsuit, the result of a lawsuit. So a couple decades ago, Linksys was sued, and the result of that lawsuit was source code. And that was the first commit that went into OpenWrt. And so from there, they started adding support for more and more devices. And that's another crucial part of OpenWrt, is that not only can you get this freedom on new devices, but a lot of your existing devices can have this freedom added to them because of the work they are doing to make that happen. Another one of our projects is Wine. So this allows people to get incrementally more agency in their computing because they can move to a different operating system, for example, but not have to change every other application that they're using if there are, say, some Windows applications that they still need to use. So this is a very crucial step in making sure that people can get closer and closer to full agency and freedom in their computing. Git is another project that you may have heard of, and it calls Software Freedom Conservancy home. So we're very happy to have them on board because so many people use them, and we want to promote what they're doing and keep it free and accessible to people so that it is not controlled by any particular for-profit entity. And so another interesting thing is that other member projects of ours include Mercurial and Darks. So we do have a range of DVCS projects on board. Now, this is an interesting project, Etherpad. It is a community collaboration tool, so you can do collaborative document editing as you would through Google Docs, but with a lot more freedom. And we run a public instance of this, so you can check that out if you want. But you can also, of course, use your own instance as well if you prefer. And speaking of community, I wanted to also highlight one of the projects that we feel is super important, and this provides crucial internship opportunities to people. You may have noticed that recently a lot of people are saying that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not important, but we at Software Freedom Conservancy believe that in order for people to have agency in their computing, that is, for everyone to have agency in their computing, that the people working on software freedom, on FOSS, need to be representative of society as a whole. So we are super happy to be promoting outreachy and encouraging this to continue to happen in free and open source software. So I wanted to move on now to the next part here, which is how we get your rights. And one of the ways that we do that is through lawsuits. And I put a frowny face here, not because we are sad that the legal system exists, but because we are sad that we need to use lawsuits. We are actually very happy that the legal system exists and is there for us to resolve these issues, because when people are prevented from exercising their freedoms, it is important that they have agency, that they have the ability to resolve that themselves. And if that needs to be through the courts, then we're happy that that system exists so they can get those rights in a civilized manner. Now, what are your rights? Well, there are several rights that you have in devices that are running Linux or other software under licenses like the one that Linux uses. And so you have the right to the source code, which means everything that you need to compile and install changes onto that device. And one of the things that companies need to do first is they need to tell you that you have these rights. And so how do they do that? Well, they do that through an offer source code in many cases. And so here are some examples from a few different companies of offers for source code that I found in various manuals from Sony, Samsung, and LG that ostensibly tell you where you can get the complete source code for these devices. Now, here is another offer for source code. This is actually the box of the OpenWrt One right here. And you'll see the offer for source code is a little bit different in that it actively encourages you to share and change the software on the device. Now, this offer for source code is different in another way too, that's a bit more subtle, which is that when you ask for the complete source code of the one, you actually get it. In the other cases, when you ask for it, unfortunately, you do not get the complete source code. You get something incomplete that does not give you full freedom and agency, that which is codified into these licenses and that companies are required to provide. And that's why we need lawsuits. Now, what exactly is it that these licenses say? Well, the GPL version 2, which is the license of Linux, and is what is attached to it whenever it is distributed. It spells out in very clear detail in the body of the license what exactly is required, this bargain, and it also explains it briefly in the preamble. So it tells you what it's going to describe. And the preamble says that when you, the manufacturer of a device, for example, are distributing or selling a product containing Linux or similar software to someone, that you need to give them, the purchaser, all the rights that we, the software developers, gave to you, the manufacturer. And so these rights would include, for example, you were able to install and modify the software on the device that you are selling to them. So if you are able to do that as the manufacturer, you need to give them, the purchaser, the right to do that too. So they must be able to modify and reinstall changes onto that device that you are selling to them. So that is the bargain. It seems fairly simple to me, because you're getting all of this code that you can do as you wish with, and so you just need to hold up your end of the deal. Unfortunately, companies sometimes don't want to do that. They wish to alter the deal, but fortunately, the license says you can't do that. You're not allowed to alter the deal. Sorry, there was a minute there. There we go. So you're not allowed to alter the deal. That's not allowed. And so what we do, and thankfully we have these mechanisms available to us, is we can prevent them from altering the deal. And so the first thing we do to prevent this is we ask nicely. So we go to them and we say, hey, we noticed that this source code is incomplete. Could you please fix that? And while we do that, we show our work. And how exactly is it that we show our work? Well, we put the source code candidates on Use the Source. And so you can check out the website with this QR code if you want. I'll have a URL a bit later as well. And we post all of these source code candidates, or at least as many as we can, onto this website so that you can see what we are receiving from the companies and whether it is compliant or not, and you can confirm for yourself whether you're able to reproduce any of the issues we found or the successes that we found. And so here are some examples. So the OpenWrt One, you might expect, and indeed it is true that this has complete source code available. So you'll see here that you can compile and reinstall the software onto the router. So you can check out the details there if you want to, download the source, reproduce this result for yourself. So we're very happy for that. The ThinkPenguin router that I mentioned earlier is also in this boat, the boat of compliant source releases, and so we're very happy that they did that as well. Interestingly, with the ThinkPenguin router, they ship you a CD with the router, so they don't even need an offer for source code because they gave you the source code with the device. So that's a pretty cool thing. We're very happy for ThinkPenguin. Now, there are some companies that don't do quite as well. One of them is Google, and so the Nest Hello, which is a device of theirs through acquisition, we did not receive complete source code for that. So we have a very detailed description of all of the issues with the source code candidate that they provided to us. I'm just going to provide you with one summary section here. And in short, we tried to compile a bunch of the programs on this device, but we were not able to compile the programs for the device because they were missing a bunch of steps in their scripts used to control compilation. So we told them about this, and they still have not fixed it. So we would like them to fix it. Now, there are other manufacturers too. For example, TP-Link, that wireless router manufacturer that I mentioned earlier, also has some issues with their source code candidate. And in this case, we were able to compile something, but when we compared it with the firmware image that they provided, it was missing a bunch of kernel modules. So we asked them, hey, could you please provide us with the source code for those kernel modules? We are still waiting for that source code, unfortunately. Now, Bosch makes a bunch of things, including dishwashers. This dishwasher contains Linux, and we asked them for the source code for this dishwasher. And they provided us with something that compiled, but they provided us with no information about how to install what we compiled onto the dishwasher. So I'm not sure when I look at the dishwasher, it doesn't seem obvious to me how to install software onto it. So they need to provide me the steps needed to do that, because that is what the license requires. Now, I'm going to go into a few examples of companies where there have been lawsuits, and I am going to do that very briefly. If you want more detail on these lawsuits, please go to a talk happening right after this one by Bradley Kuhn, who is the Policy Fellow at Software Freedom Conservancy, and he will be talking more about these lawsuits in Ballroom G at 11:45. So one of those lawsuits was against AVM. So they are another router manufacturer, and they sold a router to Sebastian Steck in Germany, and Sebastian asked them for source and did not receive complete source code. So he asked them for a couple years, and they still didn't give him complete source code, and so he sued them. And eventually, he got complete source code thanks to the lawsuit that we funded. And so in this lawsuit we funded, where Sebastian got source code, we were able to get software repair and reinstall for users of AVM routers. So it's very exciting that purchasers of the device have the ability to use the courts to get their rights. And that's exactly, yes, absolutely. So we're very happy to be able to have supported Sebastian in making that happen, and very grateful for Sebastian's work in that. Now, also Vizio. So Vizio is a TV manufacturer. We purchased a TV from them in 2018. We found when we asked for source code that it did not have complete source code available for it. We kept asking, and then we bought a new TV in 2021, 3 years later, because we thought by now they must have fixed it, and the new TV had the same problems. And so we sued them in 2021, and we are currently going through the courts as a purchaser of the device to ensure that we're able to get the source code for that TV so that we can do interesting projects like, say, an OpenWrt for TVs, because we think that would be really neat to have. Now, there's already been some wins in this. For example, a federal court judge had occasion to say that our cause of action was legitimate. So it seems that courts are already recognizing that purchasers do have these rights, and we are going to be talking more about this on our website and elsewhere, which leads me into the next point and final thing that I wanted to mention, which is what are you going to do? Well, related to this lawsuit, the ways you can help us out with these activities that you're doing is you can come down to Santa Ana in September, and you can go to the Orange County Superior Courthouse and cheer us on. Please do so very silently and respectfully, but you can come down there and see the trial happening with us against Vizio in the courts. We sued them in Orange County because that is where they are headquartered, and so that is what you can do if you're interested. Starting September 15th, we would expect it might take a week or more, so there will be some other opportunities. But yes, morning of September 15th, save the date, go to the courthouse and check it out there. So that is one of the things you can do. You can also talk to us if you are really excited about bringing a lawsuit as a purchaser of a device. We would be happy to coordinate with you about that. But if you don't want to bring a lawsuit right now, there are a lot of simpler things you can do as well to help us out. So one of the things you can do is that if you see a GPL violation, you can tell us, you can let us know about that. So you can email us, compliance@sfconservancy.org, and I'll just put a QR code up there as well, so you can use that. So for example, if you have a device that you know runs Linux, but you haven't received source code or an offer for source code, please let us know about that. Or if you have received source code and it is incomplete, you cannot compile or install it, or if you're just unsure, maybe you received something from the company and you are just unsure, you don't know if it's enough, please let us know and we can test that out for you. So another thing you can do if you receive a source candidate, or if you want to see what other source candidates people have received, is that you can put these candidates and see what candidates have been put at use the source. So you can go to this website, you can upload a source code candidate so that people can comment on it. You can see what comments people have made on other candidates, because really what we want this repository to be long-term is a place that people go to discuss the neat things they're able to do with all their rights. That is the source code that is giving them the rights to make changes to and install those changes onto their devices. So we're very excited about that. Now, one thing that is actually very common that basically everyone can participate in is that if you see an offer for source code, for example, like those ones from LG, Sony, and Samsung that I showed earlier, you can send that to us. So you can upload a picture of that offer for source code to this website right here. We'd highly encourage you to look around at the different devices that you have, maybe in the menus or in the manual, and see if any of them have an offer for source code. And if they do, please send a picture of it to us at this address here, and then we will ask for the source code on your behalf, since that is what the license allows us to do. And finally, I want to say that what you buy makes a difference. And if you're, for example, in the market for a new router, we would highly recommend that you purchase an OpenWrt One. So for every purchase of an OpenWrt One, $10 goes to Software Freedom Conservancy and the OpenWrt project. So we really appreciate everyone who is purchasing these devices, because one of the crucial things is that we have more power when we talk to manufacturers, so we can make them do what we want. We can make them give us the freedom that we need, the agency that we need to ensure that we are able to operate with freedom in society and do the things that we need to do with our technology. So if you are in the market for a new router, please check that out. Now, if you would like to continue using an existing router, or if you'd like to buy a used router, there are, of course, great ways to do that too with freedom in your computing. So check out this website, for example, which is a list of routers with newer hardware that support OpenWrt. Check that out, because we are very insistent that people should not contribute more to e-waste if they can avoid it. So please continue to use that existing hardware if you can. And very lastly, I want to say that what you don't buy also makes a big difference. So the OpenWrt One, that funding that we're getting, it basically just covers costs. And so there is additional funding that we require to keep our mission going and to ensure that we're able to do these important things. So please become a Software Freedom Conservancy sustainer and contribute to our work that way to make sure that we can continue doing these important activities. So building new hardware like the OpenWrt One that respects your freedom, supporting all of these important software projects that give you agency in your computing, and getting your rights in all of that existing hardware by suing companies when necessary. So thank you very much. Check out the source code for these slides if you like. Of course, I would provide that to you. The link is there at the bottom. Become a sustainer of Software Freedom Conservancy, and I will take your questions.
Cool. Raise your hand if you'd have a question, and Hannah is running around with a microphone. There you go. And of course, if you do get a chance after the keynote, the expo floor is still open. Lots of great sponsors to see, including the Conservancy booth, where you can come see one of these routers in person.
That's right. If you want to see one of these in person, we're there right at the entrance to the exhibit hall. We have a bunch of these around if you want to look inside or otherwise check them out. Go ahead.
Are there any of the mainstream consumer brands you'd say do a good job or even a decent job at this? I mean, you had a lot of the bad examples. Are there any good examples you were able to share?
So the ones that I am aware of are the ones I have told you about already. And there is one other one that comes to mind, which is Keyboardio. So they make keyboards, and they have a GPL v3 keyboard firmware. So you should support Keyboardio as well. But yeah, it's really unfortunate that there are not more examples I can give you.
So first off, congratulations. I know how hard it is to build hardware. The fact that you were able to do it in 11 months is tremendous. So my question is, what is the SFC's position on Secure Boot? Is it on the roadmap for the OpenWrt One or Two, or is Secure Boot incompatible with right to repair? So I'm aware of like TiVoization and that whole history.
Yeah, okay, so since you mentioned TiVoization, I'll just clarify what it is. TiVoization is when you reinstall software onto a device and then the proprietary software that was running on that device ceases to work properly. And so we don't require that companies continue to make that proprietary software continue to run as long as you can still make sure that Linux and other software under copyleft licenses runs on that device. So you're asking about Secure Boot, and I'm guessing you're talking about installing your own keys onto the device. And so the hardware that is in the OpenWrt One and that will be in the OpenWrt Two, it has support for that. We didn't want to make a big deal about it just because there are some different potentially misconceptions about what that might mean. Of course, we want to give you full control over the device to put your own keys in it. So that is something that can definitely be developed further. But yes, there is support in the hardware for that sort of thing.
The FCC certification depends on using the wireless chip, I presume. So if I were to modify the code that drives that chip, what would it do to the FCC certification?
So the FCC has certified the software that is running on the device, and the thing that you may, I'm not a lawyer. I am not, someone who works with these regulatory frameworks myself. So it's up to you to stay in compliance with these things if you are messing around with, the radio frequency stuff on the device. We can't guarantee that it will remain compliant with FCC regulations if you're modifying that sort of thing on the device. But we would find it very unlikely that by most modifications you would be tampering with that sort of thing.
With the blobs that you have, is it a situation of with the blobs, is it a situation where you need to actually flash the hardware, or are they just files in the operating system that can be replaced?
Yeah, so the blobs are just files in the operating system that can be replaced. So that's a great thing. If we're able to free those blobs, you just replace the non-free ones with the free ones, and then away you go. You have more freedom.
There are some standards committees that are forming, like the MIPI Alliance, which are creating standards that have something called hook IP. And there's a driver for a onboard bus called I2C, with the replacement of which is I3C. And to get copies of the MIPI 1.1 specs, you have to be a member of the alliance that costs a certain amount of money. So there are essentially legal strategies for having for creating standards where the lack of freedom is built in. Is the Software Freedom Conservancy aware of that? And if so, what are they doing about it?
So we definitely want to make sure that standards information is available as widely as possible. So we are very much concerned about that. And you did remind me that we do, when necessary, we pay for things required for devices like this. So if there was some sort of certification process required for I3C that costs some money, we could pay for that. As an example, with the OpenWrt One, we bought a block of MAC addresses, which cost several $1,000s. And so when you look up the MAC address on your OpenWrt One, it will say manufacturer OpenWrt, because we did that work.
Since most of the purchases are done through places like Best Buy and Amazon, are you guys trying to push your way into those places to sell your devices?
Yes, absolutely. So the OpenWrt One is available through unofficial resellers on Amazon if you want to buy it there. And regardless of where you buy it, $10 of each purchase goes to Software Freedom Conservancy and OpenWrt. And we are working with other distributors so that future products like the OpenWrt 2, we expect that the 2 would be available on Amazon officially from day one. So yes, we're working to get other distributors too.
Cool. I think, I'm sure Denver would be happy to answer more questions.
Yeah, that's right. I'm happy to.
Either at the booth or here in the audience.
Absolutely.
But wanted to make sure you all have enough time to get to the expo floor, thank our sponsors, get to your next talks, which are kicking off in a little bit here. Thank you again for joining us for SCaLE. Again, today is the last day. Don't come back tomorrow. We won't be here. There is apparently another convention in town. But again, thank you for joining us. We'll be back in this room this afternoon for Leslie Lamport's closing keynote. As a reminder, SCaLE is put on entirely by volunteers. If you'd like to get involved and be part of the team, find somebody wearing one of these fancy schmancy black jerseys, and they'd be happy to help you get involved. Thank you again for your support, and we look forward to seeing you this afternoon and again next year in 2026. Thank you.
Thanks so much.